We're going to go into the Parsha and get a little bit of a reflection on the Parsha. I usually give a Parsha class to the Jews in India every week, but because Purim was on Sunday, I wasn't able to do it. But nevertheless, we're in the Parsha now. We got other people joining us, so whatever. But the point is just saying that you know one of the big focus points, right, is is developing what they call, I guess, even they call it in academia, they call it learning culture, a culture of learning, right? And this concept of a culture of learning is really the basis of our movement, right? And the movement is to basically bring the wisdom of the sages out into the mainstream world, right? Like just open the whole door, the whole vault of all the sages, everything, and just have it out there, and basically creating a culture where people have real spiritual sources. Because the problem is that the people that we learn from today have never worked on themselves, right? Like they have done it in an artificial, external way, but not through the midas, not through the midas of Torah, right? Not through the self correction component, right? They're operating in the illusionary world. What is the illusionary world? The illusionary world is the world of imagination, the world of imagination, right? And that living in that place of imagination and collective imagination, right? Because this collective imagination, this collective imagination is what society, is basically functions on, right? If we're holding by the teachings of the sages that says like hey, we're only connecting to a limited aspect of reality through the five senses, and everything else is pretty much a projection, right? Is an expression of our imagination. So that means if I come and talk to you, that means I can articulate to you what you are feeling through your five senses, and therefore now your imagination and my imagination become connected. And this is what you call groupthink, right? And so the thing is, it's like, okay, so if I believe that my imagination is dominant, this is a world, triggered on vanity, right? Of ego, because it's not just saying ego, like, oh, I walk around like I'm better than everyone, or vanity, I want to stare at myself in the mirror. Like, no, it's not about that idea. What it's about is saying that, hey, you know what? My internal framework of understanding perceives that everything that I see, hear, taste, and touch is the full truth of what I'm experiencing. So if something tastes good, it must be good, right? Or something feels good, it must be good, right? And that's it. That's the extent of my rational deduction of what's going on around me, right? And so the movement that we're pushing is a learning culture, right? And what is this learning culture? Learning culture is basically saying that now that we open up the door with the sages and the person says like, hey, how do I improve my life? Hey, we got some sources for that. Why was the world created? Hey, we got sources for that. Who am I really? Hey, we got sources for that too. And our argument is that the authors that we're learning from have actually went through a process of working on themselves and fixing themselves. And through that evolution of internal transformation, they wrote this manuscript. I can't say that about any of the people, on Amazon's top whatever list. I can't. I can't say they worked on themselves through Torah. I can't say they worked on themselves through Shabbos, through Purim, through Rosh Chodesh, from kosher, from working on that aspect of the heart, right? Rav Ashlag brings that, up into the age of 13, the soul's in a place of selfishness, right? But then that this aspect of the soul is somehow connected to the expression of the heart, right? And so this dynamic of the expression of the human being, this expression of the human being, of its uniqueness, starts to manifest through the heart, through Torah mitzvahs. So you're telling me some other guy from this other nation, right, and a whole different outlook and a whole different connection to the source than I do, and I'm going to that person for wisdom and guidance. I'm trusting his scientific method. People try to get upset because like I challenge things. And well, for me, science is very much rooted in white supremacy. Why? Because the dynamic of what makes something relevant and true, like say for example, so I have $100 million, right? And I want to be able to I want to be able to um I want to be able to uh start a lab, right? I want to I have like say I have $100 million grant for scientific research, right? So what do I do with what do I do with this grant for $100 million for scientific research? Okay, I go and get a building, you know, I get a bunch of scientific equipment, I hire a bunch of scientists, and these scientists are going to be credible people, and I pay them this big salary. And the reason why I'm paying them salary because they're connected to other scientists and other scientific groups. And so after whatever research and conclusions that they come up with,
Shalom, shalom, everyone. I can't hear anything.
you can't hear me or no? Wait, hold on. Can you hear me now or no? Hey,
Yes,
Elton.
we can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So anyway, so the point is just saying that what we're talking about is this idea of groupthink, right? And we're talking about this idea of learning culture, right? Because I was just talking and having a conversation with Ochi now, and we're just explaining this idea, like what is the movement? What are we really trying to do? What we're trying to do is open the vault of all the sages and their wisdom and letting that come out. And like people say, like, hey, us being able to provide solutions. And so the idea is to say, like, what's on the opposite side? Right? The opposite side is saying science, right? So the whole system of science is basically the understanding of what's going on around us, right? The method of coming to an understanding, right? Okay, fine. Now my problem with that is that if that's your mechanism, your mechanism to do that, if you were inquiring about God's creation without using God's system to understand it, like if you're going to create a method to understand nature, what is your basis? What is the foundation of that method? Is it connected to atheism or is it connected to monotheism? Meaning that monotheism says that the human being has a soul, period. So if you're going to give me a outlook on biology or science of diets and how the food affect all these different, but if you don't take into account that I have a soul, and that soul once it leaves the body, there's no more life, right? And this body I have is just it's an outfit like you wear in Purim, right? You discard it after Purim's gone. You're not wearing the outfit anymore. So that's what it's like for the internal life. Right. So if you're coming to conclusions and you don't even start with the basis that the human has a soul, how can I trust? How can I trust your outlook on anything else? So anyway, so with that being said, we've been learning a lot of uh, very ancient sages and different sages. So what we want to do tonight is something a little bit different, and we're going to learn from what we call a contemporary, right? And the rabbi that I'm bringing was actually chief rabbi of the UK, and his name is Jonathan Sacks. Some people know him as Lord Jonathan Sacks. But long story short, I mean, he's one of the most prolific orators of our generation. I think he was born in 1948, in I think March, and he died in 2022. No, I mean 2020. Sorry, I think like November 7th, 2020. But it was a huge loss. But he has so many writings and such a legacy, and so I wanted to bring just some of his thoughts on this week's Torah portion, right? And the thing is, And that's what we were talking about, learning culture, right? Because the thing is, when we say learning culture, we want to make an alternative argument to humanity and say, hey, you know what? This is the way you guys have been doing things, and here's the outcomes. What we're saying there's another way, right? We're saying that there's a way that we articulate reality through the basis of having a soul, and how that soul influences the body, and how that body and the soul influences the physical reality. Right? We're saying that this is the way the world's designed. Now, if you disagree with us, okay, prove it. Maybe so. You know something we don't know. It's 70 faces to the Torah. What do you got? But if you don't have an alternative thing, and your only basis to say, well, I can't equate that we have a soul because it's metaphysical. We can't equate it. We don't have instruments. No, you've not tried to create instruments to understand the soul. Because if you understand the soul, that means that changes the paradigm of how I identify myself. You can't control me with race. You can't control me with economics. You can't control me with social status, because now I'm not articulating myself exclusively on the definitions that you create. And that's what I was saying about the whole thing about the lab, right? So I go and I get a grant for $100 million. I open a building. I hire a bunch of scientists. They come from with conclusions. They write down those conclusions. And then they take those conclusions to the places that they came from. And the places that they came from say, wow, what an amazing conclusion. And so they write about it, right? And then they publish that inside of what they call a journal, right? And then somebody's reading that journal somewhere else at a different university, and they write something based off of what was published in this journal. And now it's credible information. How was I able to do that? Because I have $100 million, right? That's what I'm saying. It's white supremacy. Because science in our society is based around the ability to control definitions and to control perceptions of those by creating these credible institutions. And then we're supposed to go along with that. We've never won in that situation. The small guy is never going to win. And when I say white supremacy, I'm not saying that white people are benefiting from this. No, I'm saying the supremacy culture that comes out of the West, right? That takes a certain ethnic group and places them in connection to God and to connection to prosperity and connection to rulership, and then designs institutions to perpetuate that. And then I learn that data, and then that becomes my reality. And I'm saying that's not right. The only thing I should be subjected to is God's vision, for God's imagination, right? And that's the Torah, right? So, anyways, we're gonna learn Rav Jonathan Sachs. You know, it's interesting. I mean, he has an interesting perspective on this week's parsha that I don't think we'll get to. He plays a very modern type of, and he brings like modern sources and these types of things. But still, it's a great read, and it's fun, and it's nice, and it's a good transition in starting getting all this heavy stuff about Pesach that we're going to get into, tomorrow. Okay, so he's interesting. So he has a whole series of weekly Torah portions, which I suggest all you guys read, on around like leadership, right? And leadership, and he takes all the different Torah portions and he goes to different aspects and he builds concepts around leadership. So Vayak'hel, right? Vayak'hel, he talks about team building, right? We learn the principle of team building, right? Amazing thing, right? Whoever thought? Okay, so Rob, so blessed memory, Rob Jonathan Sachs, be with us. We're here. We're learning your Torah. Yerushalayim, Texas, Houston, Dallas. Let's go. All right. So he says, how do you? Does he opens this? How do you? I mean, how amazing is what he's about to ask right now, and how much is it connected to us? How do you re-motivate a demoralized people? How do you put the pieces of a broken nation back together? And so he says that is the challenge Moshe faced. He said this is the challenge faced by Moshe in Parsha Vayak'hel. Okay, so that's what he's saying that he's doing right now. So he's giving us a frame of reference to analyze this Parsha from. Right, so we're going on his thinking and we're going to go through his experience, and this is part of the beauty of learning the writers of the Torah, because we get to see how their mind works, right? When we would learn inside of our classes in yeshiva, it wasn't just about what we were learning in the text in the Gemara, right? It was about the way that our Rebbe understood the Gemara, right? Because we wanted to understand how he understood it because that's the way he was teaching it, right? So over here, we have the chance to go through the thinking process of Rob Jonathan Sachs, not as a totality. There's 70 faces of the Torah. There's so many interpretations. There's so many ways to look at it, but this is one, and we have the privilege of learning his. Okay, so he says the key word here is Vayak'hel, and he gathered. Okay, so he says, and he gathered. That's what Vayak'hel means. He gathered. But he says kahila means community, right? So he's basically bringing up this thing, like saying, like, wait, don't just read Vayak'hel like, oh, he gathered. He gathered the people, right? That's what you would want to say. He gathered the people, right? On a superficial level. He says the word kahila means sex. So kahila is how you say community. How's the kahila? Oh, kahila's great. He says kahila or kahila is a group of people assembled for a given purpose. He said that purpose can be negative or positive or negative, constructive or destructive. He said the same word appears in the beginning of the parsha as the beginning of the solutions appeared in the previous parsha as the start of the problem. So what's the start of the problem? When Moses saw that when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered Vayak'hel. Ooh. So what's going on right now? Right? So when we're hearing Vayak'hel in last week's Parsha, it's around the building, this darkness that was coming, that was making this ego come. And he says, Vayak'hel around Aaron and said, come make us a God that will go before us. As for this man, Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what he has happened to. So that's a whole conversation. We're not going to go back. We can't go back in time. But we could kind of definitely look at the human condition, obviously, here. And it goes back to that aspect of how we see a limited frame of reality. Now, we're reading the Torah. We could clearly see Moshe's up there talking to Hashem. We could clearly see that. We're reading the Torah. But they're down there on the ground. And they're looking at the world through their humanly eyes, right? Their human eyes. They're in 1% reality. And through that, after having the greatest connection in human history that any group of people will ever have, was experienced on Mount Sinai, the greatest form of unconditional love, complete unity of a group of people. And that unity allows them to bring down the Torah. And right after that, this is what happens, right? He says the difference between the two kinds of kahila is one that results in order and the other in chaos. Coming down the mountain to see the golden calf, we read that Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become the laughing stock to their enemies. And he says the verb running wild, ra, means loose. Sorry, not ra, but ra'eh. I don't have it in Hebrew in front of me. Anyway, so he says means loose, unabridged. Wait, unrestrained. Okay, so all right. He said there is an assembly that is disciplined, task orientated, and purposeful, and there is an assembly that is a mob. So he's saying there's the variations of two types of assemblies that happen. One assembly was by Aaron in the darkness, by a hill, right? And then he has another one that he's saying, now Moshe is saying it. Now we got to understand, is he correcting it? What's going on? And so they're talking about this idea of different types of assemblies. People gather for negativity. The Israelites have gathered for negativity, and they've gathered in holiness. Okay? So he said the assembly that is disciplined, task-oriented, and purposeful. And there's an assembly that is a mob. It has a will of its own. People in crowds lose their sense of self-restraint, and they carried along in a wave of emotion. They have a term for this. It's like mob or something like this, like some type of effect where people are together. They just, especially with men, men just get together. They start going wild and rioting, and they don't even know why. He says people in crowds lose their sense of self-restraint. They get carried along with the wave of emotion. Normal, deliberative thought process become bypasses by the more primitive feelings of the group. All right, so logic, becomes debilitated. And he says this is what the neuroscientists put in a, what is this? You see this? It was this Amy Gadala hijack. Passion runs wild. All right. Anyway, so let's just go into this. So he's bringing some scientific stuff. So he says there has been studies of this. Charles Mackey, Extraordinary Popular Delusion and the Madness of Crowds. Okay, so there's a study done about this. And there's another study of Gishiva bin Ban, the Crowd, a study of the popular mind. This was in 1895. The first one was in 1841. And he says there is a Wilford Trotter instinct of Harold in Peace and War in 1914. One of the most haunting works on the subject is Jewish Nobel Peace writing Elias Kaniti, Crowd and Power, in 1960, English publication in one. So there's all these different studies that have been done on groupthink and people getting in crowds and going wild, right? And not and rational thinking being deduced and them just getting caught into the flurry. He says, Vayak'hel is Moses' response to the wild abandonment of the crowd that gathered around Aaron and made the golden calf. So he's trying to correct this. He says he does something fascinating. He does not oppose the people as he did initially when he saw the golden calf. Instead, he uses the same motivation that drove them in the first place, that they wanted to create something that would be a sign that God was among them, and not on the heights of a mountain, but in the midst of the camp. He appeals to the same senses of generosity that made them offer up their golden ornaments. And the difference is that they are now acting in accordance with God's commandment and not for their own spontaneous feelings. So that's a very important point of leadership, right? That's a very important point of leadership, because it's like, sometimes like you just think about it. Like, I mean, he comes and he was upset with them. He dropped the tablets. But what does Moshe do next after that? He appeals to speaking in a way that he forgives them by reminding them of the purpose, the original goal, what we're trying to do. And it wasn't about how frustrated and how upset he is about what they did wrong, right? He was able to elevate that conversation and to move it forward. And that's a very powerful thing with leadership. He said he asked the Israelites to make voluntary contributions to the construction of the tabernacle and the sanctuary and the Mishkan. And they do so with such generosity that Moses had to order them to stop. Oh, they just kept giving. If you want to bond human beings so that they act for a common good, get them to build something together. So that's the undertone. So bringing people together, the way to do that is about allowing people to build something together, right? So it's a very important nakuda and very important point to focus on, right? Is this idea of saying like, hey, we're trying to bring people together. So number one, if I'm talking to a group of people, say I'm talking to the community, the African American community, for example, or the Jewish community. Not saying they're separate. I'm not saying they're separate, but they got names. And I go to them, I could say, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, how could you be doing this? You're not living this way, this, right? Because you see them, they're breaking the golden calf. I mean, they're building a golden calf, right? No, Moshe does the opposite. Moses goes to them and reminds them of their ultimate destiny, reminds them of that. And then the mechanism of rebuilding the people was allowing them to all participate in doing something collectively together. He says, get them to undertake a task that they can only achieve together and none can do alone. The power of this principle was demonstrated in the famous scientific research exercise carried out in 1954 by Musafer Sharif and others from the University of Oklahoma, known as the Robbers Cave experiment. Sharif wanted to understand, or Sharif rather, Sharif wanted to understand. He wanted to understand the dynamic of group conflict and prejudice. To do so, him and his fellow researchers selected a group of 21 white 11-year-old boys, none of whom had met before, and they were taken to a remote park camp, a summer camp in Robbers Cave State Park, Oklahoma. And they were randomly allocated into two groups. Initially, neither group knew of the existence of the other, and they were staying in a cabinet far apart. The first week was dedicated to team building. The boys hiked and swam together. Each group chose a name for itself, and they became the Eagles and the Rallators. I don't know how to say this word, but they basically like put their names on their shirts and their flags. They create a whole identity. He says, then 4 days later, they were introduced to one another through a series of competitions. And there were trophies, medals, and prizes for the winner and nothing for the loser. Almost immediately, there was tension between them, name calling, teasing, and derogatory songs. It got worse. Each burned the other's flag and raided the other's cabin. They objected to eating together with all the others in the same dining hall. The third stage was called the interrogation phase. Meetings were arranged. Two groups watched films together, and they lit a Fourth of July firecracker together. And the hope was that these face to face encounters would lessen the tension, and they would lead to reconciliation. They did not. Several encounters broke up with the children throwing food at one another. On stage four, the researchers arranged a situation in which a problem arose that threatened both groups simultaneously. The first was a blockage in the supply of drinking water to the camp. The two groups identified the problem separately and gathered at a point where the block had occurred, and they worked together to remove it and celebrated together when they were successful. In another, in another, both groups voted to watch some films. Researchers explained that the film would cost money to hire, and there was not enough in the camp fund to do so. Both groups agreed to contribute an equal share to the cost. And in third, the coach on which were traveling stalled, and the boys had to work together to push it. By the time that the trials were over, the boys have stopped having negative images towards one another. On the final bus ride home, the members of the team used their prize money to buy drinks for everyone. Similarly, similarly outcomes have emerged from other studies. The conclusion is revolutionary. You can turn even hostile fractions into one cohesive group so long as they are faced with a shared challenge. You hear that? And that all can overcome together, but none do alone. Rabbi Norman Lam, former president of Yeshiva University, once remarked that he knew only of one joke in the Mishnah, the settlement that the scholars increased the world in peace. He says in Brachos, rabbis are known for their disagreements. How can they be said to increase peace in the world? I suggest that the passage is not a joke, but a precise, collaborated truth, a precise collaborated truth. To understand it, we must read the continuation. Scholars increase peace in the world, as it is said, all your children will learn of the Lord, and great will be your peace of your children. Read, he says, read it, not your children, but your builders. When the Torah scholars become builders, they create peace. If you seek to create a community out of a strong individualistic people, you have to turn them into builders. Wow, this is like unbelievable, right? You have to turn them into builders. That's what Moses did in Parsha Vayak'hel. The the team building, the team building, even after a disaster like the golden calf, is neither a mystery nor a miracle. It has done by it is done by setting the group a task, one that speaks to the passions, and no one is and no one subsect of the group can achieve alone. It must be constructive. Every member of the group must be able to make unique contributions and then feel that it is been valued. Each must be able to say with pride, I help like this. This is what Moses understood and did. He knew if you want to build a team, create a team that builds. It's powerful, no? Thoughts, reflections, ideas, inspirations.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay. I was just thinking about earlier today, my husband, before we left, we were kind of laughing about a scripture in Ecclesiastes where it says that two is better than one, and so they, just working together, you you'll have a great reward in working together. That's just my thoughts on it.
yeah. So on that point, yeah, it's a perspective, right? And maybe we could go through a couple other this week. We'll see. But the point is just saying that when we look at the situation, we're reading the Torah. We could see Shashem, we could see Moshe, we could see everything, right? We could even see the beginning of creation, right? And but the Israelites who are in that story at that moment could only see that 1% reality, right? So the dynamic of the Torah would allow them to see that no, we are promised to be redeemed. We're promised to be successful. So whether Moses comes now or 10 minutes from now, whatever, we're going to be redeemed. What are we worried about? What are we panicking about? Why would we perceive that we're no longer connected to Hashem, right? And that's the difference. And so Moshe, being in the frame of Torah, being in the frame of the final redemption, being in the frame of Michaye Hamatim, being in the frame of the corrected souls that will come back into this world, him being in that reality, he was able to speak from that frame. Because if he was in the 1% reality like the Israelites, he would have got angry and been fighting with them, fighting with Aaron. But leadership is not looking at things from these limited frames. It's looking at it from the frame of the Torah. So in times of controversy, times of confusion, right? That's the moments where we rise higher. We go to our Mount Sinai and we're able to be one with the Creator and we're able to look down at the situation and see it for what it is, foolishness. And now, and not only that, just like we just saw Mordecai do in Esther, they had to redo the damage that the people did. And Moshe comes and does the same thing. Moshe says, "Hey, you know what? Give up all the jewelry, man. All the jewelry, the jewelry you guys use for the cat. We got to build. Now we got to build the Mishkan, right? All that stuff you guys did in the Tumah, in the Sitra Akra, based off of your fear, your calculation. You built the idol on your own. I'm going to show you how to build a house of God." And you had to see that you, even though you went through the Yam Suf, even though you stood on Mount Sinai, even so you saw, you're not in the frame of reference that I am at as your leader. And so that's the leadership, right? And that's the frame to really go think about in this week. Like, how do I create systems for people to build together? When we talk about our community, when we talk about the world, what are the things that could be created that could bring people together, that they could feel this sense of accomplishment, that working together, right? And what do I need to remove from myself to give more of that energy of team and building, right? Anyway, so we'll continue tomorrow. We're back on normal schedule. I know it's been like the holidays, this, late nights, this whole thing. I'm just gonna always probably have smoozes late at night. For whoever wants to join could join. But we're back tomorrow at the 15:30 for Houston and 13 for Dallas, right? So anyway, so we're back on that schedule tomorrow. So we'll be back to normal. We're back in Rav Ashlag. Tomorrow we're getting back to the Zohar. We're going back into that. We're going to touch on Pesach. But we and Otino actually we started the conversation on Pesach, so there's a video up getting ready for Pesach. We go into the source of Pesach. Major revealments come out if you haven't seen it, in terms of just seeing like what the connections, that how the sages understood it 2,000 years ago. The holidays, what they connect to, what very big things came out. We'll probably review a little bit tomorrow. And I think by Otinel, we're holding by, we're in a few places, right? We're in a very key place. We're in the 14th chapter now of Misilat Yesharim, Path of the Just, and we're really going into the deep dynamics of this frame of separation, which if you haven't been following the series, it's too much to even talk about. But the genius of this breakdown of separation is really because he breaks it into three parts, right? And these three parts that he brings it into, he talks about the different types of separations. One of which we already went to is the non-indulgence in overly pleasuring type things. But he goes into other parts. But it really allows us to understand the 365 negative things that we stay away from, the prohibition things that we stay away from. And now we can start looking at the categories of the mitzvot that we have and starting to like see like, okay, well, this fits into this fits in that. Anyways, we'll continue on. We got a lot of exciting stuff. There are people I'm learning with also private. There's another group coming in from America, so the classes are growing, and it's all a blessing. And we have nothing but greatness ahead of us. Baruch atah Adonai.